struggle with consistency when it comes to parenting your child with ADHD? Perhaps it's that you start a new routine and it just kind of falls flat after a week, or you're trying a behavior chart or a reward system, and after a little while, it loses its luster for you too. The team at Unconventional Organization, led by Skye, is here today to talk to and address those issues in particular. They support adults who have ADHD and their parents themselves, so they get what is going on for you. My name is Veronica Hunter of What Now ADHD, and I help parents to know the broad range of choices available to them when their child has ADHD so that they can select what their unique family needs to grow in health and happiness. Whether you're just starting out on this journey or you've been going for a while but are still looking for the answers that you need and you're wondering, what now? Start here, enjoy this conversation today, and consider joining us inside of Flourish, our all-in-one ADHD community that goes through a simple 5-step whole family approach to grow in health and happiness when your child has ADHD. Enjoy the conversation, and I'll see you at the end.
Hello. So one of the questions we get all the time is, how do I manage my child's ADHD when I'm trying to manage my own ADHD? And part of the picture is obviously that parents can have ADHD as well. And to help with that today, we have Skye and her team from Unconventional Organization. And they are ADHD coaches that specialize in helping adults with ADHD to especially work in the areas of scheduling, organization, and routines. One of the things that I love so much about their work is that they focus a lot on the research that really supports effectiveness for neurodiversity and what really matters most. So definitely check her out and her site, Unconventional Organization. I'll ask her to share it too, but she puts out great stuff. So we have posted inside of our Facebook group some questions and asked what you wanted to hear about. And the team here at Unconventional Organization has taken that and put together to answer those questions for us. And so without further ado, I will turn it over to them to address what things you wanted to hear about this topic.
Awesome. Great. Thanks so much, Veronica. And it's great to be here. So yeah, I'm Skye. I'm the founder of Unconventional Organization. As you mentioned, we're a research-based ADHD coaching service for adults. And yeah, we're going to talk about parenting. So full disclosure, I'm a parent-to-be. So this is not 100% something I have practical strategies in yet, but I'm very excited to be listening to Sue and Sarah, who are both ADHD and parents, and we're all ADHD in this organization. And yeah, just wanted to say it's really great that you guys are interested in working around your own adult ADHD. As we know, and I think are becoming more aware, this is a highly heritable, or appears to be, based on the number of people who have children who also get diagnosed with adult ADHD themselves. And, you know, there is a lot of research out there that working on your own ADHD strategies can really help support your child. So yeah, it's really awesome that you guys are interested in this. And yeah, I'll pass it over to Sue and Sarah to introduce themselves a little bit more.
Hi everyone, I'm Sue. So I'm one of the coaches at Unconventional Organisation. I have 2 little boys, 2.5 and 4.5, so they keep me on my toes, there's no doubt about that. But certainly having, been in the whirlwind of motherhood while managing ADHD, I know how important it is to keep on top of my own strategies, not only because it makes things just run a little bit more smoothly, but I also know I'm really modeling things for my sons, so that if ADHD is something that they have to manage, they'll have seen me doing those strategies and modeling for them. So looking forward to chatting with you all this morning, or this afternoon over there it is, sorry.
Hello everyone. I'm Sarah. I'm another coach over at Unconventional Organization. I have a 7-year-old son, and we both have ADHD brains. When remote learning became the norm, I obviously was spending a lot more time with my child, and I started to recognize how similar some of his behaviors were to mine as a kid. and also my brothers. So this pushed me to insist on getting tested. So yeah, I've just been kind of working towards, gaining more practical skills to manage both of our ADHD. And yeah, I'm just really interested to share it all with you guys.
Awesome. So I think one of the things that we were going to focus in on this morning was that idea of dopamine and how we can really use that to shore up a lot of the things that we're trying to do in terms of like our daily routines, our schedules, and really sort of being consistent in our approaches as parenting, which I know is some of the things that were mentioned in the questions. And obviously, dopamine is that neurotransmitter that provides us with that reward feeling, that feel-good feeling when we achieve a task. And because our ADHD brain often doesn't, either process it correctly or have enough to start with, the research is still a little bit unsure there. But the end result is we're not getting that same dopamine feeling that perhaps a neurotypical person would. So being able to really implement dopamine in a strategic way into our day can help us to be more successful when we're trying to implement strategies for ourselves that will help, with our parenting more generally. So I wanted to share, I suppose, a bit of an example of how that might work and how it's helped me in my own parenting. So something that we tried to implement a while back with my sons was the idea of a bit of a chore chart, so that it was really more around the idea of the value of money, because it's tap, tap, tap today, and they really had no concept of cash and where money came from. They just thought Mum tapped everything, and this is getting a bit of a worry for me. I'm like, no, they need to understand money. So we, set some really simple things for them to do throughout the day, and they got ticks on their chore chart at the end of each day, and then a payday, each week. So the problem was, I'd set it all up beautifully, of course, with my ADHD brain. I had a great chart and all those things, but
We love our charts initially.
I just wasn't being consistent in the implementation. I didn't feel like doing it, or I'd forget, or, it just seemed like a big thing to put into my day each day, sort of, consistently following through with the chart. And what I had to look at was, how dopamine was relating to that as one of the big factors. So one of the things was, it wasn't a task that was really that enjoyable, standing there sort of ticking off the things from the day. And also more generally, the days that perhaps I'd not had enough dopamine myself, I was feeling quite sort of, demotivated by the end of the day generally. So this then became an extra task that I had to put into my routine. So some of the strategies that we really implemented around that were, one, shoring up my own daily routine to make sure even on those hard days I was still getting regular dopamine sources throughout my daily schedule. But then more specifically when it came to the chore chart, it was really looking at ways to make that a task that was more fun. So I looked at the time that I was doing it, and it was right around bedtime, which, as we know, is a bit of a tough time anyway. So I brought the time forward. So rather than doing it sort of the night before, we were doing it in the morning, which for us, because I work from home, isn't as stressful. I know that's not the case for everyone if you've got to get out the door. So finding a time in the day that sort of was more likely to be successful was an important part. And then we looked at actually just making it more fun for me. So a lot of the time we think about how we make things fun for our kids, but we looked at how can I make it actually more enjoyable for me. So that involved, for me, buying some really nice whiteboard markers that I like using, and just simple little things that just made it a more pleasurable experience. That's sort of on the daily sense, but then on the weekend, we were doing the actual payday, which, to be honest, was a bit of a nightmare with a 2.5-year-old and a 4.5-year-old. You know, you're worrying about money in the mouth and all the practicalities of that. So we really looked at that as well, and dopamine, and making it something that was more fun. So we do it in unison now with something that I enjoy, which is Sunday morning breakfast. We usually have a cook-up. My husband's there, so there's two of us to manage it. I'm already enjoying, you know, some dopamine sources around breakfast, and it's now an enjoyable part of our routine, and we don't forget because we've strategically placed it in the day. Hopefully that gives you an idea of the way that if you can be quite strategic about some of your strategies in terms of, you know, where can I put dopamine into my schedule, and how can I use dopamine to help me, you know, do some of those things that I might find more difficult. You can sometimes see some more successful outcomes in the consistency and the things you're trying to implement. So.
Can I ask a quick question? So what I'm understanding from what you're saying too is that process of figuring out what the dopamine or dopamine reward is specific to each individual. And so part of the process is understanding what that means for you and how you can do that. Is that right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So it really had to be things that I enjoyed, because otherwise it just wasn't going to connect with me. So, you know, dopamine is a bit of a difficult master, because there's no easy answer. What you enjoy, Veronica, will be very different to what I enjoy. What I find rewarding will be really different to Sarah and Skye. So absolutely.
Yeah, and we create a dopamine menu around that as part of what we do at Unconventional Organisation. So you can have, and you'll have seen Jessica McCabe and Eric Tivers developed this, and we sort of expanded on it a little bit in the blog articles. You can find stuff around things that are sides, so dopamine that you can do on the side while you're doing a task. So music and podcasts is a common example. And then dopamine that you can have beforehand, like an appetizer or a starter. Different countries, different ways of saying it. And that can be things like a little bit of a coffee or a smoothie, something that you like beforehand. And there's other kinds as well. So we help you develop a whole list, and then basically have that list in front of you to make it a bit easier. You don't have to reinvent the dopamine wheel every time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so there's consistency, I think, with like, how do I consistently do the reward chart or the structure that I put in place? And then I feel like is it different, but this feeling of like, then every day starts to feel the same and kind of boring. And then the whole day just kind of stinks. And I feel like that can be the case too. So like, I guess, I don't know if somebody was saying consistency from that perspective, like, do you want to speak into that for a minute?
Yeah. Sue, I think this is dopamine.
Yeah.
Go for it.
I think definitely, and that's one of the reasons we tap into that Dopamine Menu strategy that Skye suggested, in terms of really having a broad range of things that you can draw on to switch in and out. So even though as ADHD people we succeed better or have better outcomes when we have routines, we often don't like routines either. So anything that we develop has to be really flexible, so that we can shift things in and out, and make adjustments when we need. But that sort of links in with what Sarah was talking about too, about working memory, because sometimes we forget about the other options. We just keep trying to do the thing that worked last week, and it's not working anymore, and that can sort of lead us into not trying anything new. So ways to sort of externalize all those tools by having a printed Dopamine menu, or by having, I suppose what we often call is like almost like a tool bag of things that you can use. So knowing that when something's not working, to go into your tool bag and, you know, get something else out to try and shift things up. And sometimes that is, you know, a large part of what we focus in coaching is reinventing what you're doing so that it works again, or a new way of doing something so that you can continue with the strategy, particularly when you're trying to implement things with your children, because you want to sort of be keeping that consistency up, but you need to be able to keep it up. and the same with just your general routines, because the more settled you are, I suppose, the more able you are to support your family and their needs, which I think links into what a few people were asking about on the group about that emotional regulation, which I think those sorts of scenarios that you were talking about, Veronica, is probably when we're often likely to experience that emotional regulation, where there's sort of two main times, like the one time when you're just struggling and don't know what to do, or it's just overwhelming. That's certainly a factor, and that's when we need to start building in routines and strategies. But the other time is when, but this worked last week, why isn't it working now? That can sort of trigger off a lot of that emotional regulation issues, because it's very frustrating, because you feel like you put all this effort in, and now suddenly it's like it's all out the window. And so remembering that there's always going to be a bit of that cycle, and that's okay. And then, next month, some of those things may come back into our life. I mean, there's a reason there's a Facebook group specifically designated to selling ADHD hobby items, because we have a cycle where we will be really into something for a while, and it's amazing for a while, but then being able to let it go and use the next thing is part of that sort of process, I suppose.
And that's why we build in so much of that flexibility. Like Sue said, it's not about this is your routine. If it changes even a little bit, it will be broken and you'll have to create a whole new one with us. It's like we're building that flexibility in so that when you get that time and it doesn't work for whatever reason, your kids, etc., you have that inbuilt, like, okay, no, I have a plan for how to adjust this and get back on track.
One more thing that I wanted to touch on with consistency, though, is it's important to remember that it's totally okay not to be consistent and identical 100% of the time. That's the good thing about routines, is that they can be kind of restructured, reordered, oh, today I don't feel like doing chores right in the morning. Maybe I'll do chores after lunch, that kind of thing. And I've kind of been doing some research into habit forming and stuff like that. And they find that on average, it can take about 60 days for a new routine to become an automatic habit. So kind of what that means is that as long as you're working towards it, and you're trying to constantly remind yourself of this habit, whether or not you actually get it done, you're going to start building that automatic response for your brain to go, hey, remember, you have to do that thing.
I think that's an excellent point, and perhaps an excellent one to end on too. But the reason is because it's so hopeful, right? Like, it's not then that you're always having to do all of that work. But if you put in that work for a period of time, you will get that automaticity, and it will get easier. That's effectively what you're saying, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Any other thoughts to share?
I think the only other one from the chat that we didn't touch on was around that sort of sensory overwhelm, which I certainly identified, with two little kids, they're so it's really looking at, I suppose, some ideas of grounding and sensory resets, and how we can sort of feel more centered and put strategies in place that allow us to still be able to meet their needs, but to be comfortable in our space. So, one that I use around the home a lot is music, because it sort of is an extra layer that I enjoy to the noise, so that the loud banging of two little boys going nuts is not sort of as intense. But with that, obviously, it's very similar to dopamine in that it's going to be very unique to every individual, but certainly exploring ways that we can combat some of that sensory overload is really important. But I think it links into everything we just talked about, in that if you've got your routine and you're feeling more settled and you've been doing it for a while, so it's starting to feel more natural, you're accepting that it might be flexible and it might change at times. There's lots of dopamine in your day. I find the sensory stuff is easier to manage because I'm in a better place, if that makes sense.
It absolutely does. And what I'm hearing a lot of what you're saying is make sure your own cup is full, so to speak, right? And as parents, that's something that tends to be the first thing we let go of. So I appreciate the reinforcement of how important that is throughout what you're saying.
And sometimes think small. I think, they talk about self-care, and that is essentially very, linked to dopamine in some ways. And, we always think, oh, I've got to go to a spa weekend, or I've got to, do this huge thing. But sometimes it's just having a shower with some really nice smelling body wash that you go, oh, like just those little moments in the day. They all add teaspoons into our cup. They might not be big bucketfuls, but enough teaspoons will still help.
That's a beautiful analogy. Any other last thoughts or a final invitation for anybody who is watching live to write in your question really quick as I ask Skye to also share where to find your organization? Like, how do we find you?
Yeah, so you can find us. We're at www.unconventionalorganisation with an S, not a Z, .com, and you can find us there. You can book in to have a 20-minute consultation with me if you want to work with any of our coaches. We actually go through an executive functioning support survey, so you can actually see the areas that you've got good strategies already, and then the areas that you want to work on, which a lot of people find really helpful, because when you start, you don't always know exactly where you're struggling. You just know that you're struggling. There's also articles there. We post every week, different articles, pieces of research, things we've already discussed. And you can find us on a Facebook group as well. So strategies, Unconventional Organisation, you can search that. And I'm pretty sure Veronica will leave links below, because my working memory wouldn't pick it all up in an audio.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. But yeah, that's us.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for being here, for sharing all of that. It's been amazing and uplifting, because just knowing the choices and the options and there's help out there and where to go next, like that helps so much. So appreciate you and your work and your team and the value that you've added here today.
Awesome.
Thanks, Veronica. Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Cool.
Well, I hope you really enjoyed speaking with Skye and learning from her. And I know that this idea of dopamine menu and what can be applicable to help me stay engaged throughout the duration of the day has been really transformative. Skye and her team at Unconventional Organisation are going to be helping to support us inside of Flourish this month, this September, with ADHD What Now? And if you are at all interested in joining and getting some personal attention from her team, then join us by going to whatnowadhd.net. That's whatnowadhd.net. And I look forward to meeting you there and supporting you, not only with Skye and her team, but also with this simple 5-step all-in-one whole family approach to supporting your family when your child has ADHD. See you there.